Hi, so it's my great pleasure this afternoon to have the opportunity to talk to Stephen Yao, and I wonder if you'd be good enough, Stephen, just to give us a bit of an idea about your own background. I've read quite a bit of your work, but it'd be really nice to know something about your career.
Okay, my first job was as an assistant lecturer in history at the University of Sussex, appointed by my wonderful supervisor, Asa Briggs, who was, as it were, my academic father, if you like. And I stayed at Sussex for many, many years until in 1989, I became principal of Ruskin College in Oxford.
Yeah.
And stayed there for 10 years. And since then, I've been very involved with the Co-operative College in Manchester. And we moved it from its old stately home in Loughborough to Manchester, where it really belongs. So I chaired the board of governors of the Co-op College for 10 years or so, and started the Cooperative Heritage Trust with Mervyn Wilson, looking after the Rochdale Pioneers Museum and the Archive. So basically, I'm a social historian of labour, and especially of social movements, and especially of the cooperative movement, and all forms of what I call associationism. I've done some work on the history of different kinds of socialism, and I call the three socialisms, if you like. Collectivism, that is to say, socialism of professional managerial class, if you like, which Raymond Williams was extremely aware of and extremely sensitive to, and underlyingly and in a very dignified way, hostile to. That's collectivism, expertise, division of labour between those who know and those who don't know. And then the statism as a form of socialism, which goes without saying as being our task being to enlarge the size and scope of the state. And then there's the socialist tradition to which I belong and which I've tried to bring to the fore, which I now call associationism.
Yeah. It's an area I'm really interested in. Yeah.
What my hero, George Jacob Holyoake of the cooperative movement, a great journalist, called the moral art of association. And now I'm in my early 80s, so I've retired for some time, and actually I'm trying my hand at being a poet. I do.
Actually, Scylla told me about that, Stephen. I must read some of your work sometime. I write poetry as well.
Oh, brilliant. I have no collection yet, so I'd love to share on that.
Share poetry. So you were going to say something, I think, now we know a bit more about you, about the relevance of Raymond Williams to your work and to your thinking. And I wondered if we could just start off with that, really, with just your initial reflections, and then maybe a bit about your direct connections with him.
Good. Nice question. And because I've known Raymond's work ever since 58, 59, was it the Culture and Society came out, when I was a second-year student in Oxford studying history. And his was an utterly different approach to everything. And I read Culture and Society, I remember, one summer, and took detailed notes on it. And I think I've probably read most of the stuff that he poured out in what he called the work. He always referred to the work. And I followed his books, his articles, his interventions ever since. And maybe I could say, maybe it links to when I was talking about myself, maybe this links because a little noticed part of culture and society, 1780 to 1950, is the conclusion. And in the conclusion, Raymond says that, of course, culture, one of his 5 words, industry, democracy, art, class, and culture. Culture, he emphasizes, as you know, Sharon, is a way of life and not a possession of those who are cultured.
Yes, absolutely.
And he talks about how culture, having investigated the social history of the thought of and the uses of these 5 words in everybody from, Matthew Arnold to T.S. Eliot to everybody. He says, of course, culture for many, many working people is the art of getting together rather than going up in the loft and writing a book, if you like.
Yeah.
Thanks to my wife for compiling the index and all that.
Yes,
you know.
Yes.
And so he actually specifically refers, and it's not very often quoted, specifically refers to the whole, what I would now call the associational movement.
Yeah.
That's to say, friendly societies, co-ops, working people's, working men's, unfortunately, working people's clubs, and that whole tradition of making within the womb of the old a new social formation. And that's fully present in culture and society.
That's a beautiful expression, within the womb of the old. Yeah.
And that's mine, not his.
Yeah, I like that. I really like that. Absolutely right.
So I've followed his work ever since, and just to get right to the end of my professional life, if you like, Without Key Words, which I think is a wonderful book, not a dictionary, but what he calls a lexicon of key words. Yeah. Without that, Eileen Yeo, to whom I used to be married, and I, for many years, taught an introductory course for all graduate students in social history called Keywords in History, History in Key Words. And we couldn't have done this without Raymond's work, and we sent him the worksheets as we developed them, and he helped. And we took just words for aggregates of people. We took class, mass, the masses, which Raymond was extremely keen on deconstructing. Absolutely. The dreadful invention of what he called commercial populism, the masses. We took class, mass, people, community, and then Eileen quite rightly added, from a feminist point of view, family. Yeah. And we traced the history and function of these words anywhere that graduate students wanted to lead us to. Yeah. And this is a direct extension, if you like, or direct use of Raymond's wonderful thing, where he says at the beginning of Keywords, he says, some people ask when they confront a word, what does it mean? And Raymond always asked, who uses it, Absolutely. Who used it, and for what? Yeah, exactly. Class and language. Yes, absolutely. So I owe a huge debt to him. Absolutely, and that kind of takes us rather neatly to the question I was going to ask you about, is direct connection with you, the times you've met and engaged with him. Clearly he was involved with the course that you just described quite actively. He sort of blessed it, he kind of, and liked the idea, as did Asa Briggs himself, who, of course, who wrote about the language of class and the language of mass as well. Yes. So when did you first meet him then, Stephen? I met him first when I examined a Sussex University thesis with him, went up to Cambridge, where he'd just gone to Jesus College, Cambridge, and he was a co-examiner, the external examiner of a lovely thesis written by a feminist about the fiction of the 1890s. Yeah. And I was obviously very nervous at meeting my hero, in a way. My sort of he and Edward Thompson really are my sort of stars in the sky, Yeah, wish I had any of their genius or any of their sort of stick-to-itiveness. And wonderful people. And what I was impressed by in Raymond was his sort of modesty, and he was sort of diffident in a way. Yeah. He asked me questions as if I'd know the answer, and they're wonderfully sort of, I don't know, he was very reticent, but also very well, this is a terrible thing to say in a way, sort of very good at human relations. Yeah. And in a proper way. And he said, Thomas Hardy was being discussed, and he said, what do you think of Hardy? Sometimes he said, I feel odd about still really rating him as a novelist.
Mm.
What do you think about that now, as it were, in your generation? And to be asked a question by Raymond like that. And he was, I met him also during the days of the May Day manifesto.
Yes, yeah, you mentioned that when I think we spoke last time. What year was the Sussex thesis then?
Gosh, that's a challenge.
Just in terms of a rough time.
I must have been there I would say it's in the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
Early 70s, yes. I can't give an exact date.
Oh, no.
But the person doing the thesis was a contemporary of mine, so I shouldn't really have been doing it.
Yeah.
And I hadn't yet got my DPhil, I remember, and felt very embarrassed. And he said a funny thing, Raymond said a funny thing. He said about Jesus College and Cambridge culture and everything. He wrote a wonderful essay called My Cambridge.
He did, yeah, I love that.
But he said, funny thing is, of course they say that you don't have to eat in hall, you don't have to eat in college just because you're a fellow. But then if you actually exercise your choice and never eat in college, which he said he never did, they look at you askance and as if exercising your freedom is somehow bad manners.
Absolutely, yeah. Clearly was considered bad manners. So you say you encountered him again then next in relation to the May Day manifesto.
That's right. I may have got the order wrong, but the May Day manifesto turned from a pamphlet, I think in 67, 68, didn't it? Written by Stuart Hall, Edward Thompson and Raymond Williams, turned into a penguin in 68, 69, a penguin special. Yeah. And I want to say something in a second about another penguin special he did called Communications, which is a wonderful book. But anyway, the May Day manifesto sort of extension and rewriting and general development was given to Raymond because people knew he would do it. And we each sent in bits and reacted to bits as it came along. And so I met him in that. And again, the sort of both the doggedness and persistence, the everydayness of the work, uninterruptedness of the work. Yeah. Somehow he was available for his own work to an extraordinary degree. Yeah. And so one by one, these wonderful things came out. Anyway, and then the question that always struck me very strongly about the May Day manifesto and the National Convention of the Left. And don't ask me exactly what date the National Convention of the Left was, but that was an attempt to sort of embody the MDM in a way in an actual movement. And there were lots of debates then, as there still are. Should the socialists be in the Labour Party or out of the Labour Party? And of course, Raymond pointed out with his usual incisiveness, the question is what you do whether you're in the Labour Party or not. It doesn't make much difference in a way. No. You know, the question is what you make, what you produce. Yes. What you...
That's so interesting. I've been thinking those exact things recently myself.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and he always seems... I read when I read him myself the first time, it was like a kind of a process of discovery, suddenly realizing that someone had thought the things that you're struggling to think, if you understand what I mean, but so much more articulately.
Yes. How on earth he did those articulate things. He once came to a history workshop in Brighton. Again, although I'm a historian, I'm terribly bad at dates. When history workshop began to move out of Ruskin College and into go on tour, as it were. We had two actually, we had two in the Co-op college and one in Brighton. Anyway, and Raymond gave a wonderful lecture at the beginning of the one in Brighton. Absolutely noteless, speaking for precisely 50 minutes or an hour. He was incredibly lucid. And the way he answered questions in that Politics and Letters book.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Oh God, how could anybody summon that degree of theoretical clarity?
Absolutely. And almost, as you say, just flowing out of him somehow. Yeah.
Exactly, and very, you know, and I think in that book, I don't think I'm imagining when I say there's a strong sense of class difference between himself and the, I don't know,
Yeah.
the sort of metropolitan,
or whatever you call them. Yes, yes.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
There's a bit of sort of contained, not indignation, but sort of reasoned philosophy about how he thinks compared to how
absolutely
Perry Anderson and the other interviewers thought.
Yeah, it's not pride as such, is it? But it's kind of self-contained. I don't know. It feels like he's comfortable in himself.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
And I come from a, you know, a middle class. The most angry entry in keywords is educate. I think it comes under education or educated. It's a really deeply felt, this notion that some people are educated.
Yeah.
And I feel quite, you know, vulnerable, you know, having been away to school and, you know, coming from a middle class background and all the rest of it. And so I sort of take it in rather and think, oh God.
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. No, I mean, I have the opposite in that I come from a very much a working class background. My father was a miner, so
wonderful.
But I also have the obverse experience of
being
extremely vulnerable for that reason. Maybe
yes.
it's just being in academia that does this to you.
Yes. Because I think he was uneasy in academia.
Yes,
wasn't he?
I get that from. Certainly, I went to Cambridge too, so I certainly got that from his essay on my Cambridge.
Yes, really, he was uneasy. He was much more of an adult educator.
Absolutely. And that interdisciplinarity, you know, that vision of interdisciplinarity and
exactly
subjects connecting.
Yeah. Do you know the little communications book, the Penguin Special?
No, I don't, though interestingly, I think that's the one I interviewed Scylla last week. We had the most wonderful conversation and she held up this tattered little copy of a book, which I'm pretty sure might have been communications, because I think she said you'd had a hand in giving it to her or something.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm proud of that. Because actually, it comes out of an adult education class.
Right.
And the students he was teaching, he refers to a lot, who was working with, I think it was in the Oxford delegacy or something like that. And it was in no, that's another story about the basement of Seaford Public Library.
That's when he was working in.
That's on keywords.
Yeah.
But communications is a wonderful text. It's very practical. And it's got very specific proposals in it, like what he advocates. Oh God, we're a million miles away from this now, but he advocates the public ownership of the printing facilities, which would then be released to, leased as in leasing out, to, as it were, consortia or cooperatives of journalists, how to reorganize the press. God, we're a million miles away from that.
So far from that. What a brilliant idea.
It's lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's dotted through your life in numerous places, really, then, Stephen, isn't he? Not just in the work, but him as a presence in your own life as well.
He is. I'm maybe not amongst many people. I really admire his fiction. I like his fiction. I've written about it a bit. I've given you a reference to that. And some people think it's, you know, hesitant or you know, it's certainly not modernist.
No.
He had very interesting things to say about modernism.
Yeah.
As exclusivity.
Yes.
And I think the characters in his novels and the way in which he talks about being written by the context, as well as writing, the pressure of society in his hands, on his hands as he wrote. He's huge, and the way in which, I think it was The Volunteers or one of those books, one of those fictional books, the publisher, I think, hacked it about, you know, said you can have this and not that, and da, da, da. He was aware of the dialogue between structure and agency hugely in his own body.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Is that right?
Embodied, yeah, absolutely, I agree. Yeah, and I mean that I haven't read much of his fiction, to be honest, Stephen, because I came to his work generally pretty late. It's strange because I did English literature at Cambridge in the late 80s, and I never encountered his work at all. We were never even told about it.
No, but profoundly unfashionable, wasn't it?
By that stage, yeah, it must have been just shortly after his death, you know, but it would have been, it was profound, it must have been profoundly unfashionable. We were very much into the post-structuralist, deconstructionalist kind of mode.
He wasn't a theoreticist, was he?
No, thank the Lord is all I can say, really.
Exactly.
I much prefer his humanity, you know.
Yeah,
his humanism is, to my mind, you know, always present in his writing.
Yes.
And especially about literature.
Yes. Oh, this is good.
Yeah, I mean, my favourite is Marxism and literature. I just think it's an absolutely brilliant.
Yes. I'm always using, I'm probably talking too much right now, but I'm always using that emergent, dominant, and residual.
Yes.
I love that for social history.
Yeah.
Looking at things within existing society, which are embryonic, emergent, and and what the dominant formations, another Williams word, are, and then how things become residual or always were residual. It's very neat. It's a tool. It's like a tool to use.
Yeah, and I like that his description of different forms of education as well. You know, the democratic educator, the industrial trainer, the old humanist, I think it is, or I forget what the exact phrase is, but I love that kind of definition of different types of education. I find that incredibly helpful.
Oh, great.
You know, and his descriptions of neoliberalism as the Plan X people, or I forget the exact phrase, but I just think that's so wonderful. You know,
it's a bit prophetic, isn't it, Sharon?
Absolutely prophetic.
I mean, it isn't now sort of paranoid in any way to think that there is a Plan X.
Absolutely.
And
it feels increasingly like it's here, you know.
Exactly. We're living in it.
We're living in it, yeah. Absolutely. Terrifying, really.
Oh God.
Absolutely. You know, smoke and mirrors, you know, that all of mirrors, I think he describes it. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. So at what point did you worked with him for a few years, or just
I wouldn't say I ever worked with him, actually, you know, sort of, because he was just worked all the time with his work. But he was quite, am I right in saying that he was also quite a loner in a way? You know, he stuck to the job. I have a feeling he had an absolute routine.
He did. I mean, according to, well, I mean, I only know this from the interview I did with his 3 children, you know, and they were very clear that he had a very a rigorous routine, would be a better way of putting it. And he got up every day, and I guess his wife must have been incredibly accommodating, because, you know, he had a very specific routine, and he got up in the morning and his typewriter would start, and he worked for a particular set period of time, and tried not to interrupt that kind of rhythm or routine. It must have been necessary to him in some way, you know.
And also must have had a real sense of the political, in the widest small p political sense, that it was time that other voices that working class voices were heard. And
well, you do get this sense, as you described it earlier, you know, that sticking to it, that absolute determination, you know.
Whatever they said, you know what I mean, whatever the them of the us and them.
Exactly.
Because people did treat his fiction with some disdain, really, I think.
I guess they didn't his works more generally, though. I presume that they were well received, were they? Is that your interpretation of? Oh,
I think yes. I think the Long Revolution was, and Culture and Society was hugely well received. And Long Revolution, and yes, I think and The Country and the City. That's a lovely book, isn't it? The Country. I mean, it's still so relevant.
Absolutely. I mean, and as you said, you know, I've thought about that quite deeply, and especially relating to Matthew Arnold and some of notions of culture as well. I find that very rich.
It's not a good time to be it's
No.
difficult to be hopeful, but I have a feeling that distinctions like Raymond might have made, I can't remember whether I get this from myself or from him, the difference between defeat and failure.
Mm.
And no, I get this from Raymond as well. Of course I do. And there's somewhere, I think it's probably in Politics and Letters, there's a wonderful discussion of his work on Ibsen and late 19th century Chekhov, and especially, I think he was really interested in Ibsen and had a bit of had to be taken away from work. He got so involved in his work, a young man, in some way. And I think the distinction between some impulse being defeated, like the socialist in residential education, whatever it is, some impulse being defeated, and us having the capacity, if we can have the strength, to analyze the conditions of its defeat, rather than sort of moralize into seeing ourselves, which I'm seeing inside myself a lot at the moment as an old man. You know, have I failed? Have I, you know, what's it all amount to?
Yeah.
Is all this completely marginal now, and all that? And I think Raymond's work on the differences between something that you moralize and beat yourself up about and go on about as failure, instead of seeing the conditions within capitalism. Of course,
exactly,
the cooperative movement is not going to have much of a, you know, it's not going to be given a place in the sun.
No.
And maybe analyzing the conditions of our temporary, hopefully, defeats.
Yes.
But in the dreadful, bloody world we're living through now.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe those are also the conditions for some kind of a success.
So when did you last meet with him then, Stephen? Just thinking about that timeline.
Oh gosh, probably a long. In Brighton, I left University of Sussex in '89.
Yeah.
To go to Ruskin. And we had the history workshops in the Co-op College in Loughborough and Stanford Hall, and in Brighton at the then Brighton Polytechnic, and that must have been in the mid-80s when he came to open, early to mid-80s when he came to open a history workshop with a wonderful talk, wonderful lecture, which apparently he taught himself to do. Somebody told me once that when he first started lecturing, he wasn't nearly as good at it as he became. I think it was Sue Gardner who told me that, who was in Cambridge when he was first there. He taught himself this great art, this great skill, I should say. And it was probably around that talk when you were describing your own theoretical preoccupations, and in that talk he took all sorts of words like sign and symbol and all sorts of, I can't remember them all now, all the sort of words that were fashionable within theoretical discussions of
Absolutely.
literature, and he made them material. He traced them back to their literally material bits of wood.
Yes.
And anyway, so it was probably then. And then when I was at Ruskin, I met Joy at that lecture that I sent you a copy of.
Absolutely.
Williams the Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And she gave me the last volume of People of the Black Mountains. Extraordinary work, really, to be embarking on.
Was that shortly after his death, Stephen, did you say?
Yeah, I'm being terribly unhelpful about the exact dates.
I thought your article was 89, if I remember correctly. Good. Okay, good. Print speaks better. I've never been good at dates. People are puzzled. I'm rubbish at dates as well, but yeah, everything evolves in my mind rather than being chronological. If you know.
have an exact recall of the feelings, but not of the date.
Exactly, I'm exactly the same. Yeah, it's not very not great if you're looking into history, is it? Well, I mean, I just wonder if, just as a final thought, Stephen, I know we said we'd wrap up after about 40 minutes, but it's been lovely to talk to you, actually. And I was just wondering if you have any, I know we've really touched on this, but if you have any thoughts on the particular relevance of the work now as we've, started to think about it, and what we should most pay heed to.
Somebody remarked to me the other day, of course, the long revolution seems to get longer and longer.
Yes, it does.
And seems to get more and more distant. But his sense of, I mean, after all, in the People of the Black Mountains, he goes right back to, Neolithic times, as it were. And goes right back to sort of, and also to World War II. And partly he tries to, yes, this is good. He tries to connect hugely separated by time, moments and agents. And there's a lovely chapter in one of the People of the Black Mountains called The Coming of the Measurer. And he identifies structures of thought and structures of feeling which become dominant and which inhibit the new production and the production on behalf of the disinherited and the inarticulate and the not given space and the despised, patronized people, to collect and to federate and to link and to join over a very long period of time, deep in the past and deep into the future, the possibilities of the best chapter in the Long Revolution, creativity.
Yes.
There's a lovely analysis of what creativity is.
Yes.
Now, it isn't just an individual activity.
So,
the new production of meanings.
I think that's amazing, actually. That's really profound for me.
It is, it's good, isn't it?
It really is.
We have to, God,
it's what he does in Keywords. Everything he does is about exposing, what's the word? Kind of common sense notions, or if that's the right expression, or notions and ideas that we have to take as read and accept that need to be exposed as just one version of reality almost.
That's it. And there's one thing comes to mind, absolutely. A prophetic for right now. I think he saw the word nature as just as problematical, like all dominant meanings, as the word culture.
Yeah.
And the environment as something external to us. Somewhere there's a little pamphlet in one of my shelves from a long time ago about the green and the red, is that right? About the greening of socialist politics. And one of the novels, I think it's The Volunteers, the one about the border country, is a strong sense of, as it were, the non-metropolitan, the rural, the sense of place. And I think deconstructing and reconstructing the idea of nature, I can't remember whether there's an entry on nature in Keywords, but if so, I know it would be very, very useful for us now.
Let's look at that, actually. I can't remember.
I think he was prophetically into green issues.
Yeah, definitely.
Land.
Yes. And that continuity of place, as you say, as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is really profound in those fictional works, isn't it?
Yes, where he was brought up, and that sense of border. In the first of the novels, Border Country, or in the second generation, he's in, I think it's second generation, when his character Peter is in Oxford, and he has a lovely time playing with a road that goes between Cowley and academic Oxford, called Between Towns Road.
Lovely expression.
Which actually exists.
It really exists, yeah. Wow. Between towns.
Yeah, Between Towns Road. And Raymond plays with this idea of the two Oxfords, as it were. The one he was meeting with in his adult education work.
Yeah.
And the one that surrounded him in in the caps and the gowns, and
Yeah.
the literary the great tradition.
Yeah, the great tradition, for sure. Fantastic. Well, I think that's a rather wonderful place maybe to end it, if you think that's okay, Stephen. And
that's what. Well, I want to thank you, because I was apprehensive about all this, and to talk with somebody, not to be patronising, to be somebody much younger, as it were, who's still there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon, and I hope we can meet again